What if your entire life, people treated you like you were broken? That was reality for a young alien girl named Laura Vera, who was labeled defective and sold like a faulty appliance. But one day, standing before a cold tribunal, she broke years of forced silence with just 2 words: "I'm not property." That simple statement sent shockwaves through the room and sparked a revolution that would rock a corrupt, 3-system empire. This is the story of how that quiet girl brought giants to their knees, and if you stay with me, you'll witness every moment. Our story begins in the infamous Valar Market, a place where anything and everything was for sale, including people. A human named Kyle shouldered his way through the chaotic crowd. The air was a suffocating mix of alien spices, hot metal, and the sweat of 1,000 different beings crammed together under a blistering sun. He wiped a grimy hand across his forehead, his eyes darting between the stalls. His patched-up jumpsuit identified him as a simple mechanic, just another spacer scrounging for parts. A vendor with 4 arms tried to sell him a tacky plastic flamingo, calling it an authentic artifact from Earth. Kyle just shook his head with a tired smile and kept moving. He wasn't shopping for junk. The hyperdrive on his workshop vessel was fried, and Valar, for all its grime and danger, was the only port within a 3-day journey where he could find a replacement he could actually afford. And that's when he saw her. In a shadowed alcove, jammed between a stall hawking faulty nav computers and another selling grimy air purifiers, sat a transparent crate. But this container wasn't displaying shiny new tech. It had a single word stenciled on it in angry red letters: defective. Inside, a small, pale blue girl was curled into a tight ball. She seemed to absorb the light around her, a tiny void in the middle of the chaos. It was a child. Kyle stopped in his tracks, his hunt for engine parts completely forgotten. The crate was meant for shipping machine parts, not living beings. It had just a few crude holes punched into its side for air. A small dish of what looked like gray paste was shoved in the corner, untouched. "See something you like, Dirt Dweller?" A gaunt merchant slithered up beside him, his skin so translucent Kyle could see the dark pulse of his internal organs. "I've got primo stock, much better than that piece of scrap." But Kyle's gaze was fixed on the girl. "What's her defect?" he asked. The merchant waved 3 of his 7 fingers dismissively. "That one? She's a dud. Been sent back more times than I can count. Doesn't make a sound." "Won't follow commands," the merchant sneered. "She's scheduled for the reclaimers tomorrow." The word hit Kyle like a physical blow. He knew what reclaimers were, a sanitized term for chop shops that disassembled living creatures for their genetic material and organs. "How much?" The words left his mouth before he even registered the thought. The merchant's skin flushed a sickly green with shock. "You want her? She's broken. The disposal fee alone is—" "How much?" Kyle repeated, his voice low and hard. The merchant quoted a price that was easily enough to buy a new hyperdrive core. It was pure extortion, but Kyle didn't haggle. He transferred the credits instantly, afraid that if he paused, he'd talk himself out of it. "Your funeral, pal," the merchant grumbled, unlocking the crate with a greasy smile. "And just so you know, all sales are final." The crate door hissed open, but the little girl remained frozen, her huge, dark eyes locked on the floor. "Hey there," Kyle said softly, offering a hand but staying back a few feet. "It's okay. You're coming with me." She didn't react at all. He waited a moment, then pulled his hand back to give her more room. When she still didn't move, he tried again, his voice even softer. "I'm not going to hurt you. I swear." Something in his tone seemed to register. Slowly she began to uncurl. She was impossibly small, barely reaching his waist. She wore a shapeless tunic with a barcode printed on the chest, and her feet were bare, the soles calloused and dirty. The merchant slapped a data chip into Kyle's palm. "Ownership transfer complete. She's your problem now." Kyle ignored him, his attention on the girl, who was now standing unsteadily as if she wasn't used to it. He could see the faint, ghost-like patterns of old bruises on her thin arms, telling a story of unimaginable cruelty. "My ship isn't far," he said, just to fill the silence. "Can you walk, or do you want me to carry you?" She gave no sign of understanding, but when he turned and started toward the docking bays, she trailed a few steps behind, her movements robotic and fearful, like a creature expecting a blow at any moment. His ship, the Starforge, was parked in a lower bay, a chaotic mess of rusted freighters and sputtering courier ships. The Starforge fit right in, a 30-year-old cargo hauler he'd converted into a mobile workshop. Its hull was a Frankenstein's monster of welded plates and mismatched parts, which was how it earned its name. But inside, every system was perfectly maintained, a fact Kyle took great pride in. As they approached, the girl stopped, her eyes wide as she took in the ship's battered exterior. Kyle paused with her. "This is it," he said, tapping the faded name on the hull. "The Starforge. It's my home. I'm a mechanic. She's not much to look at, but she's safe." He really hoped she understood that last part. After a long moment, she followed him up the ramp with slow, deliberate steps. The ship's interior was a kind of organized chaos. Tools hung from magnetic strips, parts were neatly sorted in bins, and a small living space was carved out in the back, complete with a tiny galley, a washroom, and a single bunk. The girl froze just inside the entryway, her body tense as her eyes darted around the new environment. "Make yourself at home," Kyle offered. "Nothing's off limits. Are you hungry?" She didn't respond, but he saw her gaze flicker toward the galley for a split second. "Got it. I'll whip something up," he said, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid spooking her. "You can sit anywhere you'd like," he told her while heating up a simple meal of protein broth and a handful of actual vegetables he'd picked up at his last stop. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hot and nourishing. He made sure all his movements were calm and predictable, knowing she was tracking his every action. Once it was ready, he poured the broth into 2 bowls, placed one on the small fold-out table, and sat down with his own. "Not half bad," he said after the first spoonful. The girl approached silently, her bare feet making no sound on the deck plates. But instead of joining him, she took her bowl to the farthest corner of the room, sat with her back against the wall, and ate in tiny, guarded sips, as if expecting it to be snatched away. Kyle turned away, giving her the illusion of privacy. When he finished his meal, he spoke in that same gentle tone. "My name's Kyle, by the way. I don't know if you have a name or if you even understand me, but that's what I go by. Kyle." She just watched him with those unblinking eyes. "I need to get us out of here," he continued. "This place, Valor, it's bad news. I know a neutral station we can jump to. We'll go there, get our bearings." As he moved around the ship, flipping switches and running diagnostics, he kept up a steady stream of chatter, naming tools and explaining what he was doing, mostly just to fill the quiet. The whole time, the girl remained in her corner, clutching the empty bowl, watching him with an intensity that felt like more than just fear. With the pre-flight checks complete, Kyle returned to the main cabin. "Okay, we're about to launch. You might want to hold on to something. Liftoff can be a bit rough." He gestured toward a padded bench that had safety harnesses. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over and placed her bowl carefully on the floor. She didn't use the straps, but she gripped the edge of the seat so tightly her knuckles went pale. "That'll work," Kyle murmured, heading for the cockpit. The Starforge lifted off with a deep rumble, vibrating as it punched through the planet's soupy atmosphere. Within minutes, they were clear, the green and blue marble of Valor shrinking in the rear-view monitor. Once they were safely on course, Kyle engaged the autopilot and walked back to the living area. The girl was still holding onto the bench, but now she was staring out a viewport at the spectacular river of stars. "We're away clean," he said. "It's about a 30-hour trip to a station called Nexus Haven. You should try and get some sleep." He paused, then added gently, "Listen, I have no idea what you've been through or why anyone would call you defective, but I want you to know you're safe here. Nobody is ever going to put you in a box again." Her gaze shifted from the starfield to his face. He couldn't decipher her expression, but for the first time, he saw the tension in her tiny shoulders ease, just a fraction. Kyle gave a small nod, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Let me make a bed for you." He pulled some clean blankets and a pillow from a storage compartment under his own bunk and set up a small pallet in an empty alcove near the workshop. It was just a storage space, but it was cozy and out of the way. "It's not much," he said when he was done, "but it's your own space." He demonstrated by pulling a heavy curtain across the entrance. "No one will bother you in there, I promise, and I'll be right over here if you need anything." The girl slowly approached the little nook, her eyes taking in his work with a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. Kyle gave her space. "I'm turning in myself," he said. "It's been one heck of a day. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He retreated to his own bunk, leaving her to decide if she could finally trust this small pocket of safety he had built for her. What do you do when you see a child treated like trash, branded with a barcode that says defective? Well, Cale Voren spent pretty much every credit to his name to buy her freedom. He didn't regret it, not for a second. But collapsing onto his bunk, he couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. He knew nothing about kids, especially not a silent, traumatized alien girl who probably didn't understand him. Do you think he made a huge mistake? Stick around for the next 60 seconds, because what happens next changes everything. Just as he drifted off, a quiet scraping sound from the workshop snapped him out of his sleep. His heart pounding in his chest, he moved like a shadow, peeking around the doorway. And there she was. The little girl, Elra, was standing over his tools, her slender blue fingers hovering just inches above them. She wasn't touching anything, just looking, with this intense, quiet curiosity. The second she felt his eyes on her, she froze, and pure, raw terror flashed across her face. Hey, it's okay," Cale said, his voice a low whisper. "You're not in trouble. I just heard a noise." She was still as a statue, her big dark eyes locked on him, ready to bolt. "You like tools?" he tried, taking a slow step into the room. "I can show you what they do, if you'd like." She didn't speak, but she didn't run either, and for Cale, that felt like a huge win. "See this one?" he said, pointing to a slick gadget on his workbench. "It's a molecular sealer. Basically, it patches up tiny holes in the ship's skin." Then he motioned to a bigger machine. "And that beast is a diagnostic scanner. It tells me what's wrong when the engines act up." Her gaze followed his every move, and the fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by real interest. That was all the encouragement he needed. Cale kept going, explaining each tool in the simplest way he could, his voice a calm, steady bridge across her silence. After he'd covered the whole workbench, he paused. "Can you understand me? Can you talk?" Laura's eyes darted to the floor, but it wasn't fear this time. It was like she was hiding something. "That's okay," Cale said gently. "No pressure. But it'd be nice to have a name for you. Do you have one?" The silence felt a mile long. He sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "I can't just call you Kid forever. What if I give you a temporary name, just till we figure things out?" Her eyes flicked up to his for just a heartbeat before looking away again. "I'm gonna take that as a maybe," he said with a weak smile. "How about—" Just then, a chime from the cockpit interrupted him. The autopilot was making a course adjustment. Cale headed to the front, and Laura followed him like a quiet little ghost. As he fine-tuned their path, he noticed how captivated she was by the glowing holographic star chart. After he finished, he turned the display toward her. "That little blinking light? That's us," he said, tapping the icon of his ship, the Star Forge. "And we're going right there," He traced their route to a port called Nexus Haven. It's a safe place, independent. No Valor Corporation goons allowed. Ulra stared at the star map, her hand twitching as if she desperately wanted to touch the lights. Go on, Kale urged softly. You can't break it. She hesitated for a second, then reached out. Her thin blue fingers went right through the image. The light swirled around her hand, and for the first time, a flicker of wonder lit up her face. It's just light, Kale explained. A fancy way to help us see where we are in all this darkness. She pulled her hand back, but kept staring at the map, completely lost in it. You into maps and flying? Kale asked. No response. Hang on, I've got something for you, he said, leading her back to the workshop. He dug through a cluttered drawer and pulled out a small, worn metal pin. It was an old Earthfleet navigator's insignia, a bit tarnished, but still full of history. This was my dad's, he told her, holding it out. He used to chart courses for massive freighters. He's the one who taught me how to fly, and how to fix things when they break. Laura leaned in to look at it, tilting her head with that curious look he was starting to love. Here, Kale said, setting it on the workbench. You can have it if you want. He backed away to give her some room. After a moment, she reached out, her touch surprisingly gentle as she picked up the pin and turned it over and over in her hands. It's yours now, he repeated. Maybe it'll help you find your way. Laura clutched the pin to her chest, and he saw the wall around her eyes crack just for a second. To Kale, it felt like the sun coming out. All right, I'm gonna whip up some breakfast, he announced. And I mean real food this time, not that nutrient paste. He made some rehydrated eggs and toast, not exactly gourmet, but a step up. He set a plate on the table and sat down with his. This time, Laura came over with less hesitation, but she still ate in a corner by herself, placing the navigator's pin carefully beside her plate. We should get to Nexus Haven in about 24 hours, Kale said between bites. It's neutral ground, and they have good doctors there. I think we should get you checked out when we land. The word doctors made her go completely stiff, her eyes wide with panic. Whoa, not like that, Kale said quickly, keeping his voice even. Just a checkup to make sure you're okay. No needles, no scary tests. I promise. And I won't leave your side for a second. The terror in her eyes faded a little, and she slowly went back to eating. After they ate, the full weight of his decision hit Kale. Freeing Elora had cleaned him out. They had just enough fuel to make it to Nexus Haven. And that was it. He needed work. Fast. Time to hit the job boards, he mumbled, pulling up the interstellar network on his console. Laura came and stood quietly beside him as he scrolled through repair contracts. Ooh, here we go, he said, pointing. Freighter needs a new drive coupling. Easy gig, decent pay. Her eyes followed his finger, then shifted to his toolkit on the wall, and that familiar spark of curiosity was back. Want to see how this stuff really works? Kale asked, seeing her interest. He opened the kit on the workbench and started explaining the tools one by one. To his surprise, Elara stepped closer, her attention locked on him as he showed her how to use a micro-adjuster. Want to give it a shot? He offered. She only paused for a second before taking it, her tiny fingers wrapped around it, not with the clumsiness of a child, but with an eerie, muscle memory familiarity that sent a shiver down his spine. He guided her through a simple calibration, and she mirrored his movements perfectly. Whoa, Kale breathed, totally blown away. You're a natural at this. Have you done this before? She didn't answer, but a new, fierce light of concentration burned in her eyes. It was a clue, a hint that she was so much more than a defective piece of cargo. They spent the next few hours like that, with Kale showing her repairs and Laura soaking it all in, sometimes even helping. She never made a sound, but he could see her starting to relax. At one point, she nailed a really tricky sequence, and he could have sworn he saw a flash of pride on her face. As evening came, Kale made them dinner. He smiled when Laura actually sat at the table with him, even if she stayed on the far side. "You know," he said, "I still don't have a name for you, and calling you kid in my head feels wrong." An idea sparked. He rummaged in a locker and pulled out a small metal engraving kit. It was a little hobby he used to pass the time on long hauls. "Look," he said, setting the tools out. "I could make you a nameplate. You know, like my dad's pin." He drew a little rectangle on a scrap pad. "If you know your name, you could try to write it. Or I can list some names and you can pick one." Laura looked at his drawing, then reached for a stylus. Cale held his breath. She gripped it, a little awkwardly at first, then began to etch onto the pad. They weren't just random scribbles. They were elegant, complex characters, flowing with a purpose he couldn't understand. When she finished, she pushed the pad toward him. Is this your name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She gave him one tiny nod. I can't read it," Cale said, amazed. "I can carve it exactly like you wrote it down, if that's what you want. Was that okay?" She gave another nod. This one sharper, more certain. He set to work, his hands steady as he etched the strange, flowing symbols onto a little silver plate. Once he was done, he fixed a pin to the back. "There," he said, offering it to her. "Your name." Elra accepted the badge with a reverence that broke his heart, her tiny fingers tracing the grooves as if she were touching a forgotten piece of her own soul. "Can you say it for me?" Cale asked, his voice soft. She hesitated, her lips trembling as if the sound was trapped just behind them, but no words came out. "Hey, it's okay," he said quickly. "No pressure at all. Whenever you're ready." She carefully pinned the badge to her tunic, placing it directly over her heart, completely hiding the cruel, ugly barcode that had been seared into her skin. "It's so very nice to meet you," Kel said, his voice full of a gentle warmth. "I'm really, really glad you're here." That night, Laura slept deeply for the first time in the small bunk Kel had fixed up for her. He'd strung up a curtain to give her some privacy, creating a little safe haven for her inside the main cabin. He noticed that even in her sleep, she was clutching the old navigator's insignia he'd given her and her brand-new nameplate, holding on to them like they were the only things tethering her to this new life. The next morning, a soft chime woke them during breakfast. They were approaching Nexus Haven. Kel got up and walked to the cockpit, and Laura followed right behind him, a silent little shadow in a routine that already felt natural. "There she is," he announced, pointing to the main view screen, where a massive, wheel-shaped space station spun slowly in orbit around a barren moon. Its polished metal skin gleamed like a jewel against the black velvet of space. Nexus Haven was one of the last truly independent ports in this entire sector of the galaxy. A huge, spinning ring of a station, turning silently against the stark backdrop of a dead moon. It was a rare sanctuary in a galaxy overflowing with danger. Kel handled the docking sequence like a pro, his voice crisp and clear as he communicated with station control to secure a berth. As his ship, the Starforge, coasted toward the docking ring, he glanced over at Laura. Her tiny frame was rigid with tension, and her wide, dark eyes darted everywhere at once. "You're safe here," he promised, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of her fear. "No one is ever going to take you away. You're with me now, and I swear on my life, nothing will ever hurt you again." She looked up at him, her gaze searching his face, looking for even a shadow of a lie. And for the first time since he'd met her, Kel saw a flicker of something new in those eyes, a tiny spark of trust, like a fragile seedling pushing its way through cracked earth. The Starforge connected with the station with a gentle bump, and the hiss of the airlocks pressurizing filled the silence. Kel ran through the final shutdown sequence, then stood and stretched, working out the stiffness from the long flight. "Well, kiddo, we're here," he said with a warm smile. "Ready to go have a look around?" Laura hesitated for just a moment, her small hand hovering in the air between them before she reached out and took his. It was the first time she'd ever initiated physical contact. her cool fingers wrapped around his palm, her grip both timid and surprisingly strong. Kel felt a lump rise in his throat, ambushed by a sudden, overwhelming wave of protectiveness. "Okay then," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it felt like the most solid promise he'd ever made. "Let's go together." They stepped through the airlock and onto the deck of Nexus Haven. Lara's hand held firmly in his. Her new silver name badge shone on her chest, a tiny beacon of her new identity. It was the first step on a path that would change both of their lives forever. Unlike the grimy, dangerous back alleys of Valar, Nexus Haven was thrumming with life and light. It was a cosmic crossroads where thousands of different species and cultures mingled under a strict policy of neutrality. Here, even the most bitter of enemies could conduct their business without fear of a plasma bolt to the back. Elra's grip on his hand tightened as they entered the grand concourse. Her eyes went wide, trying to take in the enormous, curved chamber that was filled with a flowing river of alien beings. Above them, transparent panels offered a stunning panoramic view of the stars, while below, glowing aqueducts pulsed with recycled water like the station's very own veins. "It's okay," Kel murmured, slowing his pace to match her small, hesitant steps. "Nobody's even looking at us. We're just a couple of travelers passing through." That wasn't entirely true, of course. They did get a few curious glances. Humans weren't exactly common in this stretch of the galaxy, so a human man traveling with a little blue-skinned girl was bound to draw some attention. But the #1 rule of Nexus Haven was to mind your own business, and most beings looked away after a moment. Their first stop was a public records kiosk. Kel slid the data chip he'd gotten from the merchant on Valar into the slot. He had to know the truth. Who had they sold him? And what was Lura's official legal status? The machine hummed for a moment before a series of documents flashed onto the screen, and the words made Kel's blood run cold. During her transit from the Zephyr 4 system, Lura had been legally classified as specialized agricultural equipment. It was a disgusting, cynical loophole that turned a living, breathing child into nothing more than cargo. The records showed she had been sold 5 separate times in just 5 years. And each time she was returned with a list of complaints: unresponsive, inefficient, communication malfunction. Her final transfer, the one to Kel, had her listed as salvage, material deemed beyond any hope of repair. "This is sick," he whispered, a hot wave of fury washing over him. "You're not equipment. You're a person." Lura just stared at the screen, her expression unreadable, but he could feel the immense weight of her silent suffering. Without a second thought, Kel copied the files to his personal datapad and then permanently erased every trace of them from the public network. The fewer tracks they left for anyone to follow, the better. "Come on," he said, forcing his voice to be gentle again, despite the rage boiling inside him. "Let's get you some real clothes." They headed for the market district, a vibrant, chaotic maze of shops that sold everything from starship parts to exotic alien foods. Kel wasn't rich, but he had enough for the necessities. In a small storefront that specialized in children's clothing, they found simple, comfortable outfits that would fit Lyra perfectly, clothes that would give her some dignity, unlike the rough, shapeless sack she'd been forced to wear. The shopkeeper, a spindly creature with several arms and large, glistening compound eyes, bagged their purchases without a single question. "Would the little one care for a toy?" the shopkeeper chirped as Kel was paying. "We have amusements for nearly every known species." Kel glanced over at Lura. She was standing perfectly still, mesmerized by a display of intricate mechanical puzzles. Seeing that flicker of pure curiosity felt like watching a tiny flower bloom in the middle of a wasteland. "You want one of those?" he asked her gently. He was floored when she immediately nodded, pointing a tiny finger at a particularly complex-looking web of gears and levers. An excellent choice, the shopkeeper buzzed approvingly. A puzzle for a keen intellect. Kel added it to their things, a profound warmth spreading through him as he watched Laura clutch the small package so carefully on their way out. Their next destination was the medical bay, a stop Kel had been dreading. Just as he'd feared, Laura froze solid at the entrance, her entire body locking up with a fear so intense it was almost a physical thing. "We don't have to go in if you really don't want to," Kel said softly, his voice low. "But it's probably a good idea to just make sure you're okay. I promise you, no one in there is going to hurt you." Her eyes were fixed on the medical symbol above the door, filled with a look of pure terror. Kel knelt down to her eye level, so she could see he was telling the truth. "How about a deal? We just go in and talk to the doctor. No scans, no machines, just talking. The second you want to leave, we're out of there. No questions asked. Deal?" It took a long, heavy moment, but she finally gave him the smallest possible nod. Kel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze and led her inside. The clinic was bright, clean, and quiet, with several waiting areas designed to accommodate a wide variety of species. A receptionist with smooth, scaly skin and elegantly long fingers greeted them with a polite smile. "We'd like to see a doctor," Kel explained. "Just a general checkup. But we need someone with experience treating her species." It hit him then that he didn't even know what her people were called. The receptionist gave Laura a quick professional glance. "Cerulean physiology," they said matter-of-factly. "Dr. Hélène is our specialist in humanoid variants. She has an opening right now, if that is convenient." "That's perfect, thank you," Kel said, a wave of relief washing over him that they weren't being bombarded with invasive questions. Dr. Hélène was tall and slender, with shimmering silver skin and eyes that seemed to shift in color, currently a calming shade of blue that Kel hoped would put Laura at ease. "Welcome," the doctor said, her voice melodic and soothing. "You're here for a wellness check?" "Yes," Kel confirmed. "But she's been through some things. She has a fear of doctors and medical procedures." Dr. Hélène's eyes softly shifted to a gentle green. "I understand completely. We will proceed with the utmost care and respect." She then turned her full attention to Laura, her voice as soft as starlight. "Little one, would you be willing to tell me your name?" Laura instinctively reached up and touched her new silver badge, her fingers tracing the engraved letters, but she remained silent. "She doesn't speak," Kel explained quietly. "Not since I've known her, anyway." "I see," Dr. Hélène replied, her eyes shifting back to that calming blue. "The voice is often the last thing to return after a significant trauma. It simply needs time." She gestured to a simple, padded examination table. "Would you be willing to sit up here for me, little one? I will explain everything I am doing, step by step, before I do it." Laura looked to Kel for permission, and he gave her a warm, encouraging nod. Hesitantly, she climbed onto the table, her small body still coiled like a spring, ready to bolt at any second. Dr. Hélène kept her promise. She talked Laura through every step, moving a handheld scanner over her skin without ever making contact. Her voice was calm, a soothing presence in the sterile room. "You're a cerulean," she confirmed after a moment. "From Zephyr 4, if I'm reading this right. Your people are some of the best techs and engineers in the galaxy." Laura's eyes widened just a little, a spark of recognition for her homeworld. "In human terms, she's about 9 years old," the doctor explained to Kel. "She's malnourished, with some minor mineral deficiencies, but it's nothing critical. A few months of good food will clear that right up." "We can handle that," Kel said, the relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. "Is that everything?" "There is one more thing," Dr. Hélène said, her eyes darkening to a worried shade of purple. "I'm picking up a subdermal implant, right at the base of her skull. It's a neural suppressor. It's designed to shut down parts of the brain. Kel's relief vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury in his stomach. What parts? For ceruleans? A device like this is typically used to block speech and the ability to regulate emotions, she answered, her tone grim. They're banned in every civilized system. Can you get it out? Kel asked, his voice tight. Yes, but it's a delicate operation. You need specialized equipment. I can refer you to a hospital on New Geneva. No, Kel cut in. No big hospitals. Is there anyone on Nexus Haven who can do it? Dr. Hélène's eyes swirled with color as she thought it over. There's a technician named Kuran down in the lower levels, Dr. Hélène said. He's unconventional, but he's brilliant. You can find his shop on level 32, section 7. Just look for a bright blue door and tell him I sent you. She then turned her focus back to Laura, her voice softening without losing its authority. The choice is yours, little one. The procedure is safe, but it might feel strange. But the freedom it could give you, well, that could change your whole life. Laura's gaze dropped to the plain badge on her tunic, her little fingers tracing its sharp edges. After a long moment, she looked up and gave one firm, clear nod. It's a plan, then, Dr. Hélène smiled. For now, take these. She handed a small bottle of light green pills to Kyle. Nutritional supplements. 1 a day until they're gone. They'll help get her levels back up. Thank you so much, Kyle said, the gratitude heavy in his voice. Really, for all of this. As they left the clinic, Laura walked slowly, her mind obviously racing, but she kept her hand gripped tightly in Kyle's. Hey, there's no rush to see this Kuran guy, he told her gently. We can go back to the ship, let you get comfortable. But Laura just shook her head and pointed down, toward the humming industrial heart of the station. She had made up her mind. Let's get her settled in first, Kyle said, his voice a low comfort. Besides, I need to pick up some supplies for the Starforge anyway. Laura didn't move. She just shook her head again, her small hand pointing downward with a determination that felt as solid as the station's hull. You really want to do this right now? Kyle asked, surprised. She gave him another one of those solid, unyielding nods. Okay then, he said, deciding to trust her resolve. If you're sure, let's go. They took a cargo lift down to level 32. And the change in atmosphere was immediate. The polished chrome and clean lights of the upper decks gave way to the station's gritty mechanical guts. Giant pipes and thick bundles of cables snaked along the ceilings. The air hissed from exposed vents, and a constant, low hum of powerful machinery vibrated through the floor. Section 7 was a narrow corridor packed with workshops and messy repair bays. And just as the doctor had described, a single door stood out, painted a vibrant, defiant blue, and marked only with a weird string of numbers. Kyle knocked. A moment later, the door slid open, revealing a workshop that was a beautiful mess of organized chaos. Starship tools were strewn next to delicate medical scanners, and engine components shared space with communication arrays. Kuran, the technician, was nothing like Kyle had pictured. He was a short, round being with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like a cascade of tiny metal scales. 2 arms were deep inside an open console, a third was holding a diagnostic tool, and the fourth was carefully adjusting a bright overhead lamp. What? He grunted, his voice like grinding metal. He didn't even look up. If you're here about the atmospheric regulators, maintenance can wait till tomorrow. Dr. Hélène sent us, Kyle said. It's about a neural suppressor. That stopped him cold. All 4 of his arms froze. He turned, and his multifaceted, insect-like eyes locked onto them. His gaze settled on Elora with a sharp curiosity. Hélène sent you? Well, that's interesting. I see, Kuran said, his gruff tone softening as he looked at the little girl. A neural suppressor. Probably targeting her speech and emotional centers. That's a favorite trick of the less reputable traders in the outer sectors. Elra stared right back at him, her chin held high. A fire burned in her eyes that completely defied her small frame. "Can you remove it?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with hope. "Of course," Karan said, casually putting his tools down. "It's a simple extraction. 15 minutes, maybe less. There won't be any permanent damage, and she should have a full neural recovery in a couple of days." He gestured to a reinforced chair in the middle of the room. "Have a seat, kid. I'll walk you through it." With that same quiet resolve, Laura walked over and climbed into the chair, showing no fear at all. Karan adjusted the height, one arm grabbing a scanner, while another prepared a tray of gleaming instruments. "The device is right here," he said, pointing to an image on the screen. It was a tiny implant at the base of her neck, wired directly into her brainstem. "It works by creating a dam for specific neural signals," he continued. "My job is to remove the dam so the river can flow freely again." "Will it hurt her?" Kyle asked, stepping closer, his protective instincts kicking in. "She'll feel a momentary pinch," Karan promised. "That's it." He looked right at Laura, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I use a local anesthetic and very precise tools. You'll feel a little pressure, maybe a tingling sensation, but no pain. If you need me to stop, just raise your hand. Understand?" Laura nodded, her determination unwavering. "All right, let's get started." He was a man of his word. The procedure was incredibly fast. Karan moved with the focus of a master surgeon, his four arms working in perfect harmony to locate the implant, deactivate it, and gently remove the tiny piece of tech. He kept talking the whole time, a calm, steady narration of each step that seemed to keep Laura grounded. When it was over, Karan held up the implant, a metallic disc smaller than a pinky nail shining in the workshop light. "There, it's done. The inhibitor is gone." Laura slowly raised a hand, her fingers lightly touching the small bandage on her neck. Her expression was a mix of relief and pure wonder. "Recovery is different for everyone," Karan explained, dropping the implant into a disposal unit. "Sometimes the effects are immediate. Other times, it takes a few days for those neural pathways to wake up. Just be patient with her." "Thank you," Kyle said, transferring the payment. "How much do we owe you?" Karan named a price that was shockingly fair. "Aylin's friends get a discount," he said, his metallic scales shifting in what Kyle guessed was a shrug. "Besides, I hate those things." Leaving the workshop, Laura seemed to walk with a new lightness. She was still silent, but Kyle saw her touch her throat from time to time, as if testing a muscle she hadn't used in a very long time. "How are you feeling?" he asked as the lift hummed its way back to the upper levels. She gave a little, wavy gesture with her hand, which he took to mean different, or maybe changing. "Good," Kyle said, smiling. "Change can be a very good thing." They went back to the Starforge to drop off the supplies and let Laura rest. She immediately changed into one of her new outfits, a deep blue jumpsuit that looked much more like her than the gray tunic she had arrived in. After eating, she curled up in her little sleeping nook with the puzzle box, pulling the curtain almost all the way closed. While Elra rested, Kyle checked the Nexus Haven job boards. He found a gig for the next morning right away, some routine maintenance on a freighter's life support. Easy credits. As he reviewed the work order, he heard a tiny sound from the alcove. It wasn't a word, not yet, but it was a quiet, experimental hum. The first sound of a voice testing itself after being caged for who knows how long. He wisely pretended not to notice, giving her the space she needed to find it on her own. As the ship's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Kyle couldn't help but think about how much his life had changed. A week ago, he was just a mechanic drifting through the galaxy. Now, he was the guardian of a brave little blue girl from a species he barely understood. What would it be like when she finally found her voice? Would she want to return to Zephyr 4? That moon the doctor mentioned? Was there a family somewhere out there, searching for her? Or had they taken her so young that home was just a faded dream? The thoughts swam in his head as sleep started to take him, but a sharp, sudden beep from the comms panel jolted him wide awake. It was a top priority message. With a frown, Kyle went to the console and took the call. The face staring back was humanoid, but pale and waxy, with piercing, ice-cold eyes. "Is this the ship known as the Starforge?" the man asked, his voice completely flat, like a machine. "It is," Kyle said, his guard already up. "Who is this?" "My name is irrelevant. I represent Varcon Industries. We've been notified that you have something in your possession that is the property of my employer." Kyle felt a cold, hard knot of anger tighten in his gut. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's expression was a perfect blank. "A cerulean unit, with the designation S392. Our files show you acquired this unit on Valor 3 days ago. That transaction was illegal. The vendor had no right to sell. The unit was, and still is, the legal property of Varcon Industries." "She is not a unit," Kyle snapped, his voice thick with rage. "She's a kid. She's a person." "That is a matter of opinion," the representative said, without a hint of emotion. "According to Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C, ceruleans are classified as specialized equipment, not living beings. My employer insists on the immediate recovery of his property." "That is not going to happen," Kyle replied, his voice low and full of threat. The man's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "This is not a request. Varcon Industries has already submitted a formal claim to the station authorities for its return. You will hand over the unit, or you will deal with serious legal trouble. Station security is on their way." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving Kyle looking at his own reflection in the blank screen. He muttered a curse, then turned to see LRA standing just outside her little room. Her eyes were huge with fear, and she was clutching that awful name tag to her chest like a shield. "You heard that, didn't you?" he asked, his voice softening. She nodded, her whole body trembling. Kyle crossed the floor in 2 long steps and knelt in front of her. "Now you listen to me," he said, his voice burning with conviction. "I will not let them take you. Do you understand me? Not today. Not ever. No matter what they pull, you are staying here with me." Her frightened eyes searched his face, desperate to believe him. "I swear it," he added, his voice heavy with emotion. "We'll figure this out. We'll do it together." At that very moment, the chime for the airlock rang through the ship. Someone wanted to come aboard. Kyle got to his feet, positioning himself between LRA and the door. "Get behind me," he whispered, then went to the control panel. The outside camera showed 2 station security guards in their plain gray uniforms. They had weapons, but they were still in their holsters. Kyle let out a heavy sigh and hit the button to open the door. It slid open with a hiss, and the officer in front walked in. "Are you Citizen Kyle Vorin?" he asked, his face impossible to read. "I am," Kyle answered, his heart pounding like a drum. It all started with a knock on the door that sounded like doom itself. 2 station officers stood there, faces like granite, telling Cal they were here to seize his property. But they weren't talking about his ship or his tools. They were talking about the little girl who was trying to hide behind his legs. A mega-corporation named Varcon Industries claimed she belonged to them. Cal had just pulled this child out of a nightmare, and now these corporate suits wanted to throw her right back in. He had no cash, no connections, and no clue how to win, but he knew one thing. He had to fight. And you'll want to stick around for this, because what Cal did next is a powerful reminder that sometimes the courage of just one person is enough to shake the stars. They were led through sterile hallways to a hearing room that felt as cold and unwelcoming as a tomb. The whole place smelled like recycled air and injustice. On one side of a long table sat 2 men, a lawyer with a suit as sharp as his fake smile, and another man in clothes so ridiculously expensive they had to belong to Mr. Varcon himself, a man practically dripping with arrogance. Cal gently led LRA to the chairs on the other side. He could feel her shaking from head to toe, so he put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, trying to send a silent message that he was there and he wasn't leaving. "Please state your names for the official record," a clerk said in a monotone voice. "Cal Vorin," he said, keeping his voice firm. The clerk's eyes shifted to LRA. "And the item in dispute?" Cal's teeth clenched. "She is not an item. Her name is LRA." The corporate lawyer jumped in, his voice sounding like grinding rocks. "The unit's designation is S392. It's the property of Varcon Industries, and this man is a thief." Before Cal could argue back, a side door whispered open and the hearing officer entered. It wasn't a person at all. It was a massive, shimmering, jellyfish-like creature with its glowing brain and organs visible right through its transparent body. The giant creature floated behind the main desk, its tentacles plugging directly into the console. "This hearing will now begin," a synthesized voice announced. "I have analyzed the ownership claim from Varcon Industries. You may present your side." The lawyer, a man named Zarin, got to his feet with the swagger of a predator that knows it has its prey cornered. "Officer Jean, our position is incredibly straightforward. The unit was acquired by our company through legal channels 6 years ago. Under quadrant law, it is categorized as advanced agricultural equipment." He let out a little smirk. "Think of it as a very, very smart tractor." Zarin pushed a data chip forward, and its files instantly appeared on a huge screen for everyone to see. Invoices, registration codes, a cold, hard log of LRA's entire life, reduced to a business asset. This documentation confirms our legal ownership. There are no records of any authorized sale or transfer of ownership. Therefore, this man has absolutely no legal claim to it. The evidence looked unshakable, a fortress of legal jargon built to crush any hope. And the whole time, Zarin didn't look at LRA once, acting as if the terrified child right in front of him didn't even exist. "Citizen Vorin," the judge's robotic voice echoed. "Do you have any evidence to counter this claim?" Cal stood up, his heart racing. The only thing he had was the flimsy digital receipt from the shady dealer in the back alleys of Valar. He slid his own data chip across the table. Zarin didn't even give it a real look before he started laughing. "As you can see, the merchant in question had no legal authority to sell our property. This receipt is completely worthless." Cal felt his stomach drop. The slimy lawyer was right. In the eyes of the law, he didn't stand a chance. "But you're missing the entire point!" Cal yelled, his voice tight with desperation. "Just look at her! She's a person, a living, breathing child. She has feelings, she gets afraid, and she has a right to be free. Your laws can call her a machine all day long, but every single one of us in this room knows that's a lie." His words echoed in the dead, silent room, a desperate appeal to a system that had no heart. He wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. He was fighting for her humanity. The judge's glowing brain pulsed with light. "Arguments based on morality are not relevant here," the translator announced. "This is a matter of legal ownership. If you cannot provide proof that your acquisition of the unit was legitimate, I have no choice but to rule in favor of Varcon." The room felt like it was shrinking. As a final desperate move, Cal played his last card. "They tortured her, I can prove it. The station's doctor found a device at the base of her skull, a neural suppressor designed to physically stop her from being able to talk." Zarin just rolled his eyes. "That's a standard issue feature, not an instrument of torture. The unit's vocal functions are disabled by default to increase productivity." But before he could finish that disgusting sentence, Varcon himself slammed a fist on the table. "I've had enough of this circus. Officer, the law is perfectly clear. Give me my property back, now." The judge paused for a second before delivering the killing blow. "Based on the evidence presented, this court rules in favor of Varcon Industries. Citizen Vorin, you will surrender the unit at once." The security officers started moving toward them. It was really over. A massive wave of failure washed over Cal as he knelt down to look LRA in the eyes, trying to find words that simply didn't exist. A guard reached out to take her arm, And in that moment, it happened. A tiny voice, quiet but perfectly clear, sliced through the heavy silence. "I am not a unit." Everyone in the room froze. The guards, the lawyers, even the powerful Mr. Varkon. They all just stared, completely stunned, at the little girl who wasn't supposed to have a voice. LRA took one small step forward, her eyes fixed on the giant, glowing judge. "My name," she declared, her voice getting louder and stronger with each word, "is LRA, and I am not your property." A shocked silence fell over the room. The judge's entire body began to flash a rainbow of colors as its logical system struggled to compute this impossible new variable. Cal saw his opening. "Your Honor," he shouted, "their whole case is built on a lie. They submitted falsified records claiming she was nonverbal. That is fraud." The judge's synthesized voice came back on, but now it had a sharp, new tone. "The documentation provided by Varkon Industries now appears to be intentionally falsified. The classification of a sentient, speaking individual as equipment is a major violation of interstellar law." Zarin the lawyer broke out in a sweat and started stammering about a simple filing mistake. But it was far too late. The judge issued a new decision. "The claim by Varkon Industries is denied. Mr. Varkon and his legal team will be taken into custody immediately for a full investigation on charges of slavery and perjury." The two guards, looking both shocked and delighted, slapped a pair of cuffs on the two stunned villains. An hour later, Kale and Elara walked out of the hearing room, hand in hand, and completely free. The station had granted Kale full guardianship. As they stood by a viewport, looking out at the endless river of stars, he squeezed her hand. "So," he said softly, "what do you want to do now?" For the first time since he'd met her, Laura looked up at him and gave a small, genuine smile. It was a reminder that no matter how powerful injustice seems, the truth, even if it's just a whisper, can be powerful enough to bring empires to their knees. With every word, her voice rose from a timid whisper to a thundering roar. "My name is Lura Vera. I was born on Zephyr 4, not assembled in some lab. They ripped me away from my family when I was just 3 years old. I am a person, not a piece of equipment." The security officer, Jean, had internal circuits that whirred loudly, trying to make sense of this impossible situation. Its translator crackled to life. "The unit, it is speaking." Lura's eyes met its optical sensors, her voice now as solid as steel. "I speak. I could always speak, until they shoved this device into my skull. It hurt. It silenced my voice and clouded my thoughts. They said I was defective because I wouldn't obey, because I never gave up trying to escape." She lifted a small, steady hand and aimed an unwavering finger straight at the man named Varkon. "He's the one who bought me. He bought me and so many other kids just like me. He paid to have these suppressors implanted in our heads so we couldn't scream, so we couldn't cry out for help. He put us to work in his processing plants on Valar, forcing us to sort toxic sludge with our bare hands because we were cheaper than droids." Varkon's face contorted into a snarl of pure fury. "This is absurd," he spat. "The unit is obviously malfunctioning, probably scrambled by whatever back-alley procedure this grease monkey performed on it." Lura's voice shot back, ringing with clarity and strength. "I am not an it. I am a girl. I am a cerulean. My people are engineers and artists, not merchandise. What Varkon is doing is a crime under the Galactic Autonomy Accord, and that law overrules any local trade agreement." Kale could only stare, completely dumbfounded. How in the universe did she know about interstellar law? How did this quiet, terrified girl suddenly become so incredibly articulate? Officer John's translator clicked and whirred as its processors burned through calculations. "The Galactic Autonomy Accord does prohibit the enslavement of sentient species," it confirmed. "However, ceruleans are officially designated as non-sentient under Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C. That designation was bought and paid for with lies," Lura retorted, her voice unshakable. Companies like Varcon Industries bribe officials to classify us as property so they can exploit us for profit. It's a direct violation of the Accord's own definition of sentience, self-awareness, complex language, abstract thought, and moral agency. I am demonstrating all 4 of those criteria simply by having this conversation with you right now. Zarin, Varcon's lawyer, jumped to his feet, his professional demeanor finally cracking. This is preposterous. The unit has clearly been coached. Officer John, I demand you shut down this hearing immediately and return my client's property, Zarin demanded, his voice oozing with condescending authority. But John raised a single metallic arm, silencing him. The officer's internal lights pulsed with intense focus. "One moment," its translator stated. "The Galactic Autonomy Accord is unambiguous. Any being that exhibits the 4 pillars of sentience, self-awareness, complex language, abstract thought, and moral agency must be afforded basic rights, regardless of any prior classification." This situation presents a legal paradox. Varcon's face was turning a scary shade of purple. "There is no paradox," he hissed between clenched teeth. "The unit is property. That is established by Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C. But Laura's voice cut through his rage like a laser, sharp and steady. "I request a sentience evaluation." Those words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. Under Article 7 of the Accord, any individual claiming sentience has the right to an impartial evaluation. If I pass, you can no longer legally classify me as property. John's limbs twitched in a sign of surprise, its internal lights glowing brighter than before. "The individual is correct," John's translator announced. "Article 7 does grant the right to set evaluation. This is unprecedented." "This is madness," Varcon sputtered, his face now the color of a beet. "The unit is just parroting legal jargon it can't possibly comprehend. Someone has tampered with its programming." Lura's eyes flashed like burning coals. "I understand, because I listened," she declared, her voice swelling like a river breaking through a dam. Back at the processing plant on Valor, the supervisors would broadcast legal briefings over the speakers while we worked. I listened to every single word. I memorized it all. I couldn't speak, but I could still think. She turned her focus back to Officer John, her small frame radiating an immense power. "I request sanctuary under Article 7 until my evaluation is complete. Varcon has already demonstrated that he will harm me to silence me." Jean's circuits pulsed furiously as it processed her formal request. After a long, agonizing moment, the officer finally spoke. "The request for a sentience evaluation is hereby granted under Article 7 of the Galactic Autonomy Accord. Until the evaluation is concluded, the individual known as Lura Vera will be placed in neutral custody. Neither Varcon Industries nor Citizen Kale Bourne will be permitted to remove her from the jurisdiction of Nexus Haven." Varcon absolutely snapped, launching himself out of his chair with a bellow of raw fury. "This is an outrage! I will not tolerate this legal sideshow. My property will be returned to me now, or this entire station will regret it." "Your threat has been duly noted and recorded," John responded, its synthesized voice perfectly level. "However, Nexus Haven is neutral territory, and we are obligated to uphold the Galactic Autonomy Accord. When a claim of sentience is made, the Accord supersedes all trade protocols. My ruling is final." Varcon shot a look of pure venom at Elra, then at Kale, his eyes promising a world of hurt before he spun on his heel and stormed out of the chamber, his lawyer scurrying to catch up. Jean then turned its full attention to Kale and Elra. "The sentience evaluation will take place tomorrow, supervised by a qualified panel. Until that time, the individual Elra Vera will be held in protective custody in the station's neutral quarters." Lura's voice suddenly shrank, a trace of the scared little girl returning. Can I stay with Kale? He's the one who rescued me. I trust him." John appeared to weigh this, its lights pulsing in thought. Citizen Bourne holds no official legal status as her guardian. However, given the extraordinary circumstances, I will permit him to accompany you to the neutral quarters as an observer. Station security will be posted to ensure your safety." "Thank you," Lara said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of relief. As two security guards led them from the hearing room, Cale looked down at Laura. She was no longer the silent little shadow he'd been protecting, but a giant in her own way, whose voice was a weapon she had kept hidden for years. "You were incredible back there," he whispered, his voice thick with admiration. "I had no idea you knew all that legal stuff." Lara looked down at her shoes, her voice soft but sincere. "I wasn't positive I was remembering it all right," she confessed. "But when I heard them say they were sending me back to Varkon, I knew I had to do something. The words they just came out." "They were the perfect words," Cale assured her, his tone warm with pride. "You bought us time, but this evaluation won't be a cakewalk. Varkon is going to throw everything he has at you to make you fail." A shadow of worry crossed Laura's face. "I know. But we'll be ready for him, won't we?" "You bet we will," Cale promised. "We've got until tomorrow. We will figure this out. Together." The neutral quarters were a small, sterile little haven. Just 2 rooms with basic furniture meant to accommodate any species. Security officers stood guard just outside the door, supposedly for their protection, but Cale figured they were also there to make sure he and Lara didn't make a run for it. The moment they were alone, Lara seemed to crumple. The fierce warrior from the courtroom disappeared, and in her place was a completely exhausted little girl. She collapsed onto the edge of a cot, her shoulders drooping, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Are you doing okay?" Cale asked gently, sitting beside her. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice so faint he could hardly make it out. "If I fail that test, they'll give me back to him. He'll put another one of those things in my head. Or something much worse." Cale's heart broke for her. "You are not going to fail," he said with absolute certainty. "You're obviously sentient. You proved that to everybody in there today." "But Varkon has money and connections," Lara whispered, her gaze fixed on a distant point. "He can bribe the panel. He can fake evidence. He's done it before." "Then we'll be ready for that too," Cale insisted, his voice a steady rock in her storm. "You have to tell me everything. What's going to be on this test? What are they going to ask me? How will they try to trick me?" Lara took a shaky breath, trying to steady her nerves. "The evaluation has 4 parts, based on the Accord's definition of a person: self-awareness, complex language, abstract thought, and a sense of morality." "And you feel like you can pass all 4? Kyle asked, watching her expression carefully. "The first 2 should be fine," she said, thinking out loud. "And abstract thought isn't a problem. I was being trained as a technician before they captured me, and I've been solving mechanical puzzles in that factory for years. It's the morality part. That's tough to prove on a test. They'll probably use riddles or make-believe problems." "All right, then we practice," Kyle said, his voice becoming gentle but firm. "I'll be the evaluator. I'll hit you with the hardest questions and most impossible situations I can think of, and we'll get your answers perfect." Lara nodded, a little bit of that fire he'd seen in the courtroom returning to her eyes. "Okay, that would be a big help." And that's exactly what they did for the next few hours. Kyle threw every scenario he could imagine at her, and Lara's answers were so clear and wise, it was hard to believe she was so young. Her strength was incredible, and her responses revealed a deep character shaped by years of suffering. During a quick break, he just had to ask, "How did you do it? How did you survive all that time with that suppressor scrambling your thoughts, being treated like you were nothing?" Lara's gaze went distant, her voice soft but unbreakable. "I remembered," she said simply. "Every single day, I held on to who I was, my name, my home, my family. Even when that device made my mind feel like it was wading through thick mud, I never ever let them erase me. Your family, Kyle repeated gently, a fierce, protective feeling rising in his chest. Are they still on Zephyr 4? I don't know, Lara admitted, a flicker of deep pain crossing her face. I was just a little kid when they took me. I remember my parents. They were engineers who worked on the big weather machines. We lived in a city full of tall towers with gardens on every balcony, but I have no idea if they're still there, or if they're even alive. Kyle's heart ached seeing the raw grief in her eyes. He reached out and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. If we win tomorrow, he said, his voice full of conviction, we are going to find them. Her dark eyes met his, searching for a reason to hope. And if we can't find them, you're staying with me, Kyle said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. For as long as you want. A tiny smile touched Laura's lips, the very first one Kyle had ever seen on her face. It was fragile, but it lit her up from the inside. I'd like that. As night settled over the station, exhaustion finally caught up with Laura. The whole day, combined with the strain of speaking so much after years of forced silence, had completely worn her out. She fell asleep right there on the bed, still in her blue jumpsuit, clutching the silver name badge as if it were a life raft. Kyle carefully draped a blanket over her and sat down in the room's only chair to stand guard. He had a gut feeling Varkon wouldn't just accept the judge's ruling. There was way too much at stake. If Laura was legally declared a person, Varkon's entire illegal operation could come crashing down around him. He was right to be worried. A little after midnight, his personal datapad buzzed silently with an alert, an unauthorized attempt to override the apartment's security lock. Kyle moved silently to the door, ready for whatever was coming. He slapped the emergency alert button, notifying the security officer posted just outside. The door hissed open, but it wasn't the guards. It was two men in plain clothes with weapons, and they clearly weren't there for a friendly chat. Before they could even aim, station security officers swarmed in behind them, their own weapons drawn. "Hands in the air now," the lead officer barked. "You're in violation of station security protocols." The intruders froze, then slowly raised their hands, one of them glaring at Kyle with pure, venomous hatred. "Varan gets what's his," the man snarled. "This isn't finished." "Get them to the detention level," the officer commanded, then turned to Kyle. "We're doubling your security for the night. My apologies for the breach." "Thank you," Kyle said, his voice surprisingly calm even as his heart pounded against his ribs. He turned to see Elora sitting up, her eyes wide and locked on him. "They came for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They tried," Kyle corrected her firmly, "and they failed, and they're going to keep failing. I promised I wouldn't let them take you again, remember?" She nodded, but the terror was still in her eyes. "Kyle, what if we win? But Varkon never gives up. What if he just keeps hunting us?" It was the exact fear that had been gnawing at Kyle. "Then we'll always be one step ahead," he said, the decision solidifying in his mind. "The Starforge isn't the fastest ship out there, but she's reliable. We'll keep moving, taking jobs in different systems, and just stay off the grid until we find somewhere truly safe." "A life on the run," Lara said, the words hanging in the air. "For a while, maybe," Kyle conceded. "But not forever. If they rule that you're a person, it changes everything. Varkon could face major galactic charges for what he did to you and the others. He's not all-powerful." His words seemed to help, and she relaxed a little, settling back onto the bed. "We should try to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is a huge day." Kyle returned to his chair, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. He spent the rest of the night going over contingency plans, escape routes, and every possible move he could make to keep Laura safe. If the decision went against them, because no matter what some panel decided, he was never letting them put her back in chains. Morning came far too quickly. Station security escorted them to a much larger, more imposing chamber this time. In the middle of the room was a curved bench where a panel of 5 individuals from different species sat. Officer John was at the center, flanked by 4 others, including a human woman with silver hair and a kind, wrinkled face that radiated a lifetime of wisdom. The sentience evaluation for the individual known as Laura Vera will now commence, John announced, his voice echoing in the silent hall. As per Article 7 of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, this evaluation will assess 4 criteria: self-awareness, language complexity, abstract reasoning, and moral agency. Elra walked toward the center of the room, her back perfectly straight, hiding the terror Kyle knew was churning inside her. She still wore the plain blue jumpsuit, and the silver name badge gleamed on her chest next to the navigator's pin Kyle had given her. They were the only things in the universe she owned, 2 small symbols of the life she was fighting to get back. "Please, have a seat," said the human evaluator, her voice gentle yet authoritative. Elra sat in the large chair, her small feet dangling a few inches above the floor. Kyle was directed to a bench along the wall, close enough to offer support but forbidden from speaking. "My name is Dr. Celine Vaughn," the woman introduced herself, her tone professional and warm. "I specialize in xenopsychology and sentience assessment. These proceedings are being recorded for official review. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dr. Vaughn," Laura replied, her voice ringing out, surprisingly clear and strong. "Excellent. Let's begin by confirming your identity. Please state your name and tell us what you remember of your origins." Laura took a quiet breath. "My name is Laura Vera. I was born on the planet Zephyr 4, in a city called Kellam. My parents, Vaughn and Solara, were atmospheric engineers. I was taken from my home when I was 3 standard years old." "And how old are you now, by your own reckoning?" Dr. Vaughn inquired. 9 standard years, Laura said. "Ceruleans mature at roughly the same rate as humans." Dr. Vaughn nodded, tapping a note onto her datapad. "The first test is for self-awareness. Can you describe yourself, Laura? Not just your physical appearance, but who you are on the inside." Laura considered the question for a moment, her gaze unwavering. "I am a cerulean child who survived something terrible," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet strength. "I am intelligent. I notice small details, and I value knowledge and memory. I love building things and figuring out how they work. I feel emotions. I feel fear and hope and gratitude and anger." Laura Vera continued, her voice steady, a tiny beacon of defiance in that cold, official room. "I have things I like and things I dislike. I love solving puzzles with machines and learning about complex systems. I hate small, dark spaces and the feeling of being unable to speak my own mind." Dr. Celine Vaughn leaned forward, the light catching in her silver hair. "And do you believe you have a future? Can you imagine a life for yourself after you leave this room?" Laura's eyes were locked with the doctor's, her voice absolutely firm. "Yes. I want to find my family, or maybe make a new one. I want to learn everything there is to know about engineering. I want to help other people who have been hurt the way I was. I can see many different futures for myself, depending on the choices I am allowed to make." Dr. Vaughn nodded slowly, an expression of deep respect on her face, as she made another note. "The second criterion is complexity of language," she announced. "You are currently speaking Galactic Standard. Is that the language you were born with?" "No," LRA answered, her voice steady and clear. "My first language is Cerulean. I learned Standard from my parents, and later by listening to the supervisors at the processing plant. I think in both, but for really complex ideas, Cerulean is just easier." "Could you give us an example?" Dr. Vaughn prompted gently. LRA began to speak, and a cascade of beautiful melodic sounds filled the room. It was like listening to a song from a forgotten time, fluid and rhythmic, with tonal shifts unlike anything Kyle had ever heard before. "That was a traditional greeting," she explained, a flicker of pride in her voice. "It translates loosely to, 'I see the true you, and I offer you my own truth in return.'" Dr. Vaughn scribbled another note, her eyes wide with fascination. "The third test is abstract reasoning," she continued. "I'm going to present a hypothetical problem, and I want you to walk me through how you would solve it." She laid out a complex scenario: a space station with failing life support, dwindling resources, and a population with conflicting needs. LRA listened without moving, then began to dissect the problem piece by piece. Her mind worked like a precision instrument, cutting through each variable, predicting outcomes, and crafting a solution that was not only practical, but deeply fair. "Your logic is impeccable," Dr. Vaughn said, a faint smile on her face. "And now for the final test: moral agency. This isn't just about knowing right from wrong. It's about demonstrating that you would use that knowledge to guide your actions." She leaned forward slightly. "LRA, if this panel declares you a person under the law, what responsibilities would you have to others? What code would you live by?" LRA went quiet, considering the weight of the question. "I believe I would have a duty to respect the freedom and dignity of every other living being," she said, her words careful and deliberate. "I would have to avoid causing harm, and to help fix any harm I did cause. I would have an obligation to fight against injustice, especially the kind I've experienced, and to protect anyone who is as helpless as I once was." Her eyes darted to Kyle for a split second, filled with a look of profound gratitude. "I've learned that kindness is a choice, and when someone shows you that kindness, as Kyle did for me, it becomes your responsibility to pass it on." The questioning continued for another hour, with each panel member firing off sharp, probing questions. But LRA remained unshakable, answering with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 9 years, a wisdom forged in the fires of unimaginable suffering. At last, Officer John declared that the panel would deliberate. LRA came over and sat beside Kyle, her small hand slipping into his as they waited in the suffocating silence. "You were incredible," he whispered, his voice thick with awe. "I've never heard anyone speak the way you did." "I only told them the truth," she answered simply, her voice soft but solid. "Now we wait." The wait was mercifully short. In less than 30 minutes, the panel members returned, their faces impossible to read. "The evaluation panel has reached a unanimous decision," John announced, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Based on the criteria of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, the individual designated LRA Vera has demonstrated irrefutable evidence of sentience in all 4 categories." Her hand gripped Kyle's tightly as the final words landed. Her entire life, LRA had been treated as property, a product to be bought and sold. But in this one moment, her entire world was about to be rewritten. If you've ever found yourself cheering for the underdog against impossible odds, then you have to hear how this ends. The judge's voice boomed, "LRA Vera is hereby recognized as a sentient being, with all rights and protections afforded thereof. This ruling supersedes any prior classification as chattel or commercial asset. The ownership claim filed by Varkon Industries is denied." A wave of pure relief crashed over Kyle, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. Next to him, LRA was completely still, as if she was afraid that moving would shatter the fragile moment. But then another voice cut in. "Furthermore," Dr. Vaughn added, her tone firm, "based on the evidence presented today, I am filing a formal request for an investigation into Varkon Industries for potential violations of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, specifically regarding their treatment of individuals of LRA's species." At the back of the room, Varan, The corporate executive who had claimed LRA as his property lurched to his feet, his face a thunderous mask of fury. "This is not over," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "The financial repercussions of this decision are catastrophic, and my legal team will be appealing to the Sector Governance Board." The judge gave a slight nod. "You are within your rights to do so. However, until such an appeal is heard, this ruling is final. LRA Vera is a free and sentient being, free to choose her own destiny." Varan's eyes burned into LRA, a silent promise of retribution. Then he spun on his heel and stormed out, his footsteps echoing like distant thunder. As the room began to empty, Dr. Vaughn approached them. "You need to be extremely careful," she warned in a hushed voice. "Varan's threat to appeal isn't just bluster. He has powerful allies on that board. Our ruling is legally sound, but politics can twist justice into knots." "What are you saying?" Kyle asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "I'm saying be smart," Dr. Vaughn replied. "This decision means he can no longer legally own LRA, but it doesn't mean he won't try to silence her before she has a chance to testify against him." "We understand," LRA said, her voice remarkably calm. "Thank you for your integrity, Dr. Vaughn." The doctor offered her a kind, gentle smile. "This wasn't about integrity. It was about the truth. You are unequivocally a person. LRA Vera. I hope you find the future you so richly deserve." She paused, then added, "And should you ever wish to pursue a formal education, please contact me. I know several institutions that would be honored to have a mind like yours." After Dr. Vaughn departed, station security escorted Kyle and LRA back to their ship, the Starforge. Despite the dark cloud of Varan's threat, a profound sense of safety finally settled over them. Back on board, the years of tension seemed to visibly melt off LRA. She moved with a new lightness, a quiet confidence, touching the ship's controls as if seeing them for the first time. "So what happens now?" she asked, looking up at Kyle with those huge, dark eyes. He considered it for a moment. "Well, for the first time, that's up to you. We could try to track down your family on Zephyr 4, or we could just keep a low profile for a while. You know, take on odd repair jobs and let the heat from Varkon die down." LRA's fingers traced the lettering on her own name badge as she thought. "I want to find my family," she said at last. "But I know Varkon won't just let this go. He stands to lose everything if more of my people come forward." "Then we'll keep moving," Kyle said with resolve. "We'll take on contracts, save up some credits, and stay off the grid. We can still search for your family, but we'll do it quietly, through secure back channels. Dr. Vaughn might even be able to help with that." "And if we find them?" LRA asked, a hopeful tremor in her voice. "Then you'll have a choice," Kyle replied, though he felt a pang of nervousness as he said it. "You could choose to stay with them." He let the words hang in the air, and LRA finished the thought for him. "Or I could choose to stay with you. It would be my decision." "Yeah," Kyle said, a smile breaking through his worry. "It will always be your decision." Over the next few days, they prepped the Starforge for departure. Kyle took on a handful of small repair gigs on the station, Nexus Haven, to pad their accounts and restock their supplies. LRA was right there with him, proving to be a gifted mechanic. Her hands were so nimble and her instincts so sharp that she often outpaced Kyle. But on their fourth day, an unexpected visitor hailed their ship. It was Corin, the technician who had removed the neural suppressor from LRA's mind. "I heard what went down in the tribunal," he said after Kyle cycled him through the airlock. "That's seriously impressive. Not many folks take on Varkon and walk away with a win." "We had the truth on our side," LRA said, her voice growing more confident by the day. Corin's metallic features shifted in a way that resembled a dry chuckle. "Truth is a flimsy shield in this system. You had guts. That's what mattered." He turned to Kyle. his multifaceted eyes growing serious. "But guts don't stop a plasma bolt. Varan has a nasty reputation. He doesn't forgive people who cost him a fortune." "We're heading out soon," Kyle explained. "Just hopping from system to system, trying to stay ahead of any trouble." "Smart move," Corin said, his tone shifting. "Look, I didn't just come by to give you a warning," he said, a glint in his optical sensors. "I came to offer some help." He reached into a pouch on his belt and produced a slim, dark device. "This is a neural shield. It's an experimental model, but a reliable one. It will prevent anyone from ever implanting another control device in you, like the one I removed." LRA eyed the device, a hint of caution in her expression. "How does it work?" she asked. "It generates a low-frequency field around you that scrambles the signal used by those kinds of neural suppressors," Corin explained. "This thing won't hurt you, but it'll scramble their tech completely." Kyle eyed the device skeptically. He was thankful, but also wary. "Why are you helping us?" Corin's metallic face seemed to shift with feeling. "I've seen what they do to kids like her," he said, his voice low. "Kids with those devices hardwired into their skulls, their entire lives stolen from them. I try to remove them when I can, but for every one I save, they implant 10 more." He looked straight at LRA. "This court case, it's a chance to stop them for good. But only if you make it there to tell your story, to show everyone what Varkon really is." He pressed the neural shield into her hands. "So you have to live. You have to tell your story. You have to blow this whole thing wide open." LRA wrapped her hand around the small device, her expression hardening into a look of pure resolve. "I will," she vowed, and the words sounded like an unbreakable oath. Once Corin was gone, they scrambled to get off Nexus Haven. The weight of the neural shield was a heavy reminder of the danger still chasing them. The Starforge ghosted away from the station at dawn. Practically invisible, Kyle had found them a gig repairing atmospheric processors on a remote mining colony 2 systems over, far from anywhere Varkon would think to look. As the ship pulled away, LRA sat in the co-pilot's chair, her eyes fixed on the pinpricks of light appearing in the blackness. "From inside the plant, I never saw the stars," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It was just machines and gray walls. I almost forgot they existed." Kyle looked over at her, his heart aching at her simple words. "They were always there," he said softly, "just waiting for you to see them again." "Like me," LRA said, staring into the infinite void. "I was always in there somewhere, even when I couldn't get out." "Exactly like that," Kyle agreed, a wave of pride washing over him. The next few months settled into a rhythm. They bounced from system to system, picking up enough repair work to keep fuel in the tanks and food in the galley. LRA's knack for mechanics went into overdrive. She went from being a quick study to a total natural, sometimes diagnosing a problem before Kyle even saw it. Before long, she was taking on smaller jobs by herself, her small hands navigating complex circuitry with a confidence that blew him away. They made quiet inquiries about her family back on Zephyr 4, but it was a total dead end. The facility her parents worked at had been shuttered years ago, and all the employee files were scrubbed clean. It was like someone had wanted the Vera family to simply vanish. But even with that disappointment, LRA's spirit never faltered. The withdrawn, haunted kid from the marketplace was gone, replaced by a sharp and curious young engineer who never stopped amazing Kyle with her insights. She still had her moments, of course, sometimes waking up from nightmares of being trapped inside her own head. But they were getting fewer and farther between. They kept clear of any sector with a Varkon Industries presence, but they caught bits and pieces of news. The investigation Dr. Vaughn kicked off was crawling along, buried in corporate red tape. And Varkon's appeal had been accepted, but the board was taking its sweet time making a decision. 6 months after their escape from Nexus Haven, they were hired to fix the life support on a worn-out research station orbiting a huge gas giant. Being out here in this middle of nowhere was a nice change of pace from always looking over their shoulders. The job was straightforward, but then they saw something that made their blood run cold. Another cerulean, the first they'd encountered since LRA's rescue. He was a maintenance tech, part of the skeleton crew keeping the station running, but his uniform had a chilling barcode printed over the chest. His movements were stiff, unnatural. His face was a complete mask, and when he spoke, his voice was flat and empty. LRA grabbed Kyle's arm as they passed him in a corridor. "He's got a suppressor," she whispered, the words catching in her throat with a familiar dread. "I know that look. The way he moves, the nothing in his eyes. That was me. That's what I was like." Kyle looked at the man, a tight knot forming in his stomach. "You think Corin's shield would work on him?" Kyle asked. "If we get close enough, yes," LRA said with certainty, "but we'd still have to get the suppressor out afterward. I don't know if we have the right equipment for that." For days, as they worked on the station's life support, they observed the cerulean. He was like an automaton, working in silence, offering only short, programmed answers, showing no sign of life or personality. On their fourth day, LRA found Kyle, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We have to do something," she said, her voice unshakable. "We can't just walk away and leave him like this." "This is a massive risk, LRA," Kyle warned, his mind racing through all the ways it could go wrong. "If his owners find out, Varkon will be on us in a second." "I know," LRA said, her eyes locked on his. "But look at him, Kyle. That was me. That empty, hollowed-out feeling, like you're not even real. No one should ever have to live like that." Kyle let out a long, slow breath. She was right. "Okay. But we need a plan. A good one." They mapped out a plan to corner the cerulean during his maintenance rounds in a deserted section of the station. LRA would use the shield to disrupt the suppressor long enough for them to talk to him, to convince him to come to the Starforge, where they'd jury-rigged a medbay with some basic surgical tools. It worked like a charm. The second LRA triggered the shield, the effect was immediate. The man staggered, clutching his head as his eyes snapped into focus for the first time. "Who?" he managed to say, his voice rough from disuse. "What's happening?" "You have a neural suppressor in your head," LRA said quickly. "This is blocking its signal, but not for long. We can remove it, but you have to trust us and come with us now." The cerulean stared at her, and a spark of recognition lit up his face. "You're like me, but you're not." "No," LRA said, her voice full of strength. "I'm not anymore. And you don't have to be either." It didn't take much convincing. Aboard the Starforge, Kyle's medical scanner located the suppressor, a perfect match for the one he'd seen removed from LRA, nestled at the base of the man's skull. "I watched Corin do this once," Kyle muttered, staring at the screen. "But I'm no surgeon." "I remember everything," LRA assured him, her voice a calm anchor. "Every single movement. I'll talk you through it." The procedure was terrifying, but with LRA's perfect recall guiding Kyle's steady hands, it was a success. They deactivated and removed the tiny device, and just like that, the cerulean's mind was his own again. The man, who introduced himself as Torin, just broke down, sobbing as years of suppressed thoughts and emotions came flooding back. "How long were you?" LRA asked gently after he'd collected himself in the ship's common room. 8 years, Torin replied, his voice growing stronger. "I was an environmental engineer. They grabbed me from a research lab on Zephyr 4, put this thing in my head, and I've been passed around like a piece of equipment ever since." "Zephyr 4? Kyle echoed, glancing at LRA. "Did you know 2 engineers there named Vera, working on atmospheric processors?" Torin's eyes shot wide open. "Vaughn and Solera? Of course, we were colleagues. They vanished shortly after a corporate buyout, right along with their little girl." His gaze locked onto LRA. "You're their daughter, LRA. You have your mother's eyes." The air rushed out of LRA's lungs, a tidal wave of hope and grief washing over her. "They're alive? Where did they go?" "They were when they took me," Torrin said, choosing his words with care. "They were reassigned to a Black Ops project on an outer moon. The official story was they were terminated, but I never believed it. Vaughn and Solera were too brilliant to just throw away." "Brilliant in what way?" Kyle pressed. "They were on the verge of a breakthrough with atmospheric processing," Torrin explained. "A system so efficient and clean it would change everything. The corporations wanted it, but Vaughn and Solera were going to release it as open source for any world that needed help. After their daughter disappeared, they just folded. They did anything they were told, holding on to the hope they might find her." LRA's face was a storm of emotions. "They're out there looking for me, and I'm out here looking for them, and we're both lost. But now we have a direction," Kyle said, his voice firm and grounding. "Torrin, do you know what moon they were sent to?" "Cryon 9, Torrin said without hesitation. "The ice moon. They have a research facility buried deep beneath the ice." It was the biggest lead they'd had in 6 months of searching, but it also presented a massive problem. Cryon 9 was located deep in territory controlled by the very corporations that viewed ceruleans as property, the same corporations funding Varkon's legal fight. "We can't just waltz into Cryon 9, Kyle said later that night, after an exhausted Torrin had finally fallen asleep. "It's walking right into the lion's den." "I know," LRA whispered, the ache in her voice undeniable. "But they're alive, Kyle, and they're looking for me. We have to try." That night aboard the Starforge, the 3 of them huddled together, sketching out plans, weighing impossible odds, trying to figure out how to find allies who could get them through the hostile space between them and Cryon 9. By morning, they had a plan. It was beyond risky, probably crazy, but it was a chance. First things first, they had to get off the research outpost without anyone knowing Torrin was missing. That part, it turned out, was easier than they expected. Kyle went straight to the station administrator, spinning a yarn about a critical malfunction in the life support system. "The main exchanger's containment seals are completely shot, way beyond safety specs," he explained, using a flurry of technical terms. "We've got to fabricate new parts back on our ship and install them before the whole system goes critical. It's a 2-person job, so we'll need to borrow your maintenance tech to lend a hand." The station administrator, far more concerned about a catastrophic life support failure than the whereabouts of what he saw as a piece of equipment, didn't hesitate to agree. A few hours later, their ship was pulling away from the outpost, with Torrin's official record stating he was on loan for a high-level repair mission. Their next move was to reach out to Dr. Celine Vaughn, whose offer of help had been Lara's only ray of hope. They sent a carefully worded message through a secure, untraceable channel, laying out their situation and asking for any intel she had on Cryon 9. 3 days later, as they drifted in the dark shadow of an asteroid to conserve fuel and watch for tails, a reply from Dr. Vaughn finally came through. "The Cryon facility is very real," her message began. "It's a classified research station with heavy-duty security. Ownership is buried under a mountain of shell corporations, but a few threads point back to Varkon Industries. A head-on assault is out of the question," she continued. "But the station receives regular supply shipments. The next one is scheduled in about 1 standard month. I'm sending coordinates and ship identifiers on a separate encrypted channel. Be extremely careful. My own investigation is crawling along. Varan's appeal is still tied up in the courts. Vaughn out." True to her word, the supply ship's coordinates and identification codes arrived moments later. It was a razor-thin window of opportunity. "We could try to intercept the supply ship," Kale proposed, poring over the data with Lyra and Torrin. "We could use its access codes to get close to the base." "That's way too risky," Torrin countered, his mind already sharp and focused. "Those supply ships are tracked from the second they launch. If we deviate from the flight plan, or show up even a minute late, every alarm on that moon will go off." "What if we hide on the supply ship?" Lyra suggested, her eyes lighting up with the idea. If we can sneak aboard before it reaches Cryon 9, we could slip out while they're unloading the cargo. Cale mulled it over, his mind racing through the logistics. That could actually work. But we'd need to know the ship's point of origin, its entire flight path, and find the perfect spot to intercept it. Plus, we'd have to figure out how to get past their security scanners. Most supply ships running to black sites have automated scanners designed to detect stowaways, Torin added, his tone calm and professional. They spent the next few days ironing out the plan, pinpointing potential interception points, and brainstorming ways to fool the security systems they knew they'd run into. Torin's insider knowledge of corporate security protocols was invaluable, and Lyra's knack for electronics was improving by the hour, her fingers now as quick on a circuit board as Cale's were on a control panel. The Starforge itself needed a few upgrades. They had to install better stealth systems, enhance their short-range sensors, and rig a secure docking clamp to latch onto the supply vessel without being detected. Cale threw himself into the engineering work, grateful for a task to keep his hands busy, while his mind grappled with the mission's dangers. Lyra was right there with him, her skills now a perfect complement to his own. Can you imagine being told your parents were gone forever, only to find out they were secretly being held as slaves on a hidden ice prison? For a young woman named Lyra, that nightmare was her reality, and she was about to bet it all to bring them home. With a ragtag crew and a repurposed ship, she was ready to attempt the impossible. You're going to want to stick around to see how this small team plans to take on a massive, evil corporation. Together, they had transformed an old freighter into the Dawn Spark, a name that stood for the new beginning they all desperately craved. Their mark was a supply freighter called the Stellar Hauler, and their plan was to intercept it 3 days after it veered from the main shipping routes, just before it crossed into the forbidden Cryon system. The plan worked perfectly, which immediately put Cale on edge. They engaged their stealth drive to creep up on the hauler, docking at an unmanned emergency port on the ship's stern. Torin, who knew the layout of these corporate vessels like the back of his hand, took the lead. He used a modified plasma cutter to slice through the outer seal, careful to make a clean cut they could reseal on their way out. Within minutes, they were inside a cargo bay packed with shipping containers bound for the secret prison. "This is way too easy," Cale whispered, his gaze sweeping across the deserted, unguarded hold. "Where is all the security?" Torin glanced at his scanner. "Internal sensors are active," he confirmed, "but they're focused on the containers themselves, not the surrounding space." "Standard anti-theft measures," Lyra concluded, her voice crisp and clear over the comms. "They aren't expecting anyone to stow away out here." "Why would they? On the books, this place doesn't even exist." Cale's voice was grim. Nobody knew about it, except for the doctor who tipped us off, and anyone she might have told. They worked quickly, building a small hideout in the gap between two massive containers, lining the space with sensor-dampening fabric to make them invisible to any scans. The 3-day journey was going to be cramped and miserable, but they had all been through much worse. They hunkered down for the long, quiet ride, agreeing to take shifts standing watch. Lyra held on to the 2 items that were most important to her, a small pouch on her belt containing a powerful neural shield and a comms device capable of punching through any jamming field. As they neared their destination, the ship's engines began to whine, shifting into their landing sequence. Peeking through a tiny crack, they caught their first glimpse of the ice moon, Cryon 9, a flawless, sterile white sphere suspended in the deep black of space. "The base is built underground," Torin whispered, reminding them of the plan. "The entrance will be disguised as a cave or some other natural rock formation. Get ready." The landing was buttery smooth. As the cargo bay doors hissed open, a blast of brutally cold air swept through their hiding place. They watched as figures in heavy environmental suits started unloading cargo onto a landing dock that had been carved straight out of the ice. Lyra's heart plummeted when she saw several of her own people, the Saruans, working among the crew, each one branded with a barcode on their uniform. "More of our people," she breathed, her voice choked with sadness. "They're using them like they're just droids." Torin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get them out too, but we need to find your parents first. Stay focused." They waited for the right moment, then slipped out from behind the containers, snatching a couple of unattended envirosuits that were sitting near an airlock. The disguises were perfect. They blended in seamlessly with the other workers on the dock. With their helmets sealed, they split up. Torin beelined for a computer terminal to look up Lyra's parents, Varen and Solara. Kale moved toward a power substation to set up a diversion in case things went south. Lyra, who would be recognized instantly by her parents, had the most critical job of all, making first contact. The facility was a confusing maze of sterile white hallways and laboratories buried deep beneath the ice. Lyra walked with purpose, trying her best to look like she belonged there. After what felt like an eternity, Torin's voice finally crackled in her ear. "Found them?" he said. "They're in Section 14, Lab 7. They're on duty right now. 2 guards posted at the door." "Any signs of trouble?" Kale asked from his position at the power station. "Looks like just another Tuesday at the office," Torin answered. "No heightened alerts. You have a green light." Lyra adjusted her course, her heart pounding against her ribs. All the years of pain, of loss, of searching, it was all coming to a head. She was only moments away from seeing her parents again. Lab 7 appeared just like all the others, except for the 2 guards standing watch outside. Lyra took a deep breath and decided her best bet was to just walk right past them. Confidence was her only camouflage. She strode toward the lab door, giving the guards a casual nod. One of them held up a hand, blocking her path. "ID," he grunted. Lyra's blood ran cold. "Maintenance," she said, forcing her voice an octave lower. "I'm here to run a diagnostic on the environmental controls." The guard looked down at his wrist pad. "There's no maintenance scheduled for this lab today." Her mind raced for an excuse. "Emergency override," she snapped. "Supervisor flagged a potential pressure leak in this sector." The guard still seemed unconvinced. "Stay right here," he ordered, turning toward a comm panel on the wall. Lyra knew she only had a few seconds. Her hand instinctively went to the neural shield in her pouch. It wasn't designed for this, but she had to do something. She activated it, aiming it at the comm panel. The panel let out a spark, sizzled for a second, and then went completely dark. Seizing the opportunity, Lyra darted past the confused guards and into the lab. The frigid air hit her as she pulled off her helmet. "Mother?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Father?" Varen and Solara were hunched over a work console, their movements mechanical and perfectly in sync with each other. They didn't even notice her. They were prisoners inside their own minds. Of course, it had to be neural suppressors. They couldn't hear her or even see her. Fighting back a wave of tears, she raised the neural shield and aimed its energy field directly at them. The effect was instantaneous. Her parents stopped what they were doing, stumbling as if being shaken awake from a deep, long sleep. They turned around slowly, their eyes cloudy with confusion, which then gave way to a flicker of pure disbelief. "What?" Varen managed to say, his voice thin and raspy. Then his gaze fell on Lyra. "It can't be," Solara whispered, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Lyra, is that our daughter?" "It's me," Lyra wept, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. At that exact moment, the lab door flew open. It was Kale. "We've got to move, right now," he shouted. "Torin's been compromised. The entire base is going on lockdown." Her parents just stared, completely stunned by the chaos. "Who is this man?" Varen demanded, instinctively moving to stand in front of Lyra. "He's a friend," Lyra explained, her words rushing out. "He rescued me. He helped me get to you. They've been controlling you with devices in your heads. We have to get back to our ship before it leaves us behind." The lies they were fed about her death, the years of stolen memories, it all came crashing down on her parents. As they sprinted through the ship's corridors right behind Kale, an idea sparked in Lyra's mind. Simply getting away wasn't going to cut it. They had to hit back. "Kale," she gasped, "can you rig the shield to the facility's main communications antenna?" His eyes went wide with understanding. It was an absolutely insane gamble, but it was brilliant. While Kale worked his magic, hot-wiring the shield, Lyra stood watch. Then she slammed the activation button, blasting the shield's freedom frequency across the entire moonbase. All over the station, hundreds of enslaved Seruans froze, their eyes clearing as they woke from a decade-long trance. And then, all hell broke loose. They reached the hangar bay just as piercing alarms echoed through the entire facility. They charged up the ramp of the stellar hauler only moments before it sealed shut, the massive ship lifting off the ground as a full-blown rebellion exploded beneath them. Later, back on the safety of the Dawn Spark, with the suppressors finally gone, Lyra stood with her parents, watching the ice moon become a tiny speck in the viewport. They hadn't just escaped. They had started a revolution. Their revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about liberation. And they made a vow, right then and there. They were free now, and they would be back to free the rest of their people. Hope, they now knew, was the one thing that could never truly be caged. What if you were told your parents died in a freak accident, leaving you an orphan to be raised by a cold, faceless corporation? For Lyra, that wasn't a question. It was her life for 15 years. She was just another number, another asset, until she stumbled upon a hidden file on her father's old datapad. A message that blew her entire world apart. Her parents were alive, prisoners on a frozen moon, and she was their only hope. But how does one girl fight back against a mega-corporation that literally owns stars? If you want to see how an underdog can take down an empire, stick around. Fueled by a quiet rage, Lyra risked everything, joining forces with a renegade engineer named Kale and a shadowy insider known only as Toren. Their target, the ice-locked facility on Krianu 9. Just as they were hustling her newly freed parents across the loading dock, alarms shrieked to life, their piercing wail screaming that the escape had been discovered. A colossal starliner sat waiting, its engines humming. "Where is Toren?" Lyra shouted, her voice laced with panic as they ran. "I don't know," Kale yelled back, his eyes darting around the chaotic dock. "He was supposed to grab the data and be right with us." Right on cue, Toren burst from a side hallway, moving quickly despite a noticeable limp. "Go," he yelled, jerking a thumb behind him. "Security's right on my 6." They bolted for the supply ship, with Kale leading them toward the hidden access port they had used to sneak in. But as they got close, armored guards swarmed the dock, their heavy boots clanging on the frozen floor as they brought their weapons up. "Stop!" A voice thundered from the facility-wide speakers. "Unauthorized individuals, surrender now!" Kale didn't even flinch, his fingers dancing over the access panel's keypad. Her parents, Varun and Solara, scrambled inside right after Lyra, their faces a mix of sheer terror and newfound hope. Toren shoved them ahead, covering their retreat. "They're on the supply ship!" another guard yelled. "Seal the bay!" But it was too late. They were in, and Kale hammered the button. Steal the hatch just as the Starliner's engines roared to life. The entire ship groaned as the docking clamps disengaged, and they started to rise from the surface of Krianu. "This is just step 1, Kale warned, leading them through the enormous cargo hold. "We still have to get to our ship, the Dawn Spark." It was a small, beat-up vessel they had docked at a hidden emergency port. "As soon as we clear the atmosphere," Kale laid out the plan, "we detach and floor it." Toren, already fiddling with a scanner he had pocketed, had a grim look on his face. "They'll be on us in a heartbeat," he said. "I downloaded their security files. Standard procedure for an unauthorized launch is immediate and overwhelming pursuit. Kale just cracked a smile. Well, the Dawn Spark has a couple of surprises they won't find in any of their files. They finally reached their little ship and climbed aboard. Kale went straight to the cockpit to prep for the breakaway, while Lyra gently sat her parents down. She tried her best to explain the neural suppressors the corporation had implanted in their minds and how Kale would remove them once they were in the clear. Her mother, Silera, raised a trembling hand and touched Lyra's cheek, looking at her like she was a dream. "You came for us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion and disbelief. "All this time, we thought it was hopeless." Tears started to well up in Lyra's eyes. "I never let you go," she said, her own voice cracking. "They put a suppressor on me, too, when I was a kid, to make me forget. But I held on to your faces. That one memory, it's what kept me. The massive starliner suddenly jolted as it broke through the atmosphere, accelerating into the endless black of space. Kale's voice came over the intercom, sharp and clear. "Prepare for detachment. Everyone strapped in tight?" "We're good," Torin called back from the engine room, where he was already checking the systems he had secretly helped install. "Detaching in 3, 2, 1! With a controlled explosion, the Dawn Spark shot away from the starliner, its main engines igniting with a deep, powerful roar as it blasted away from the lumbering supply ship. Just like Torin said, the hunt was on. 2 sleek security interceptors launched from the moon's surface, their weapon ports glowing as they streaked across the black, heading straight for them. "Activating stealth systems," Kale said, his voice perfectly level as his hands moved with practiced ease across the controls. The Dawn Spark leaped forward, its illegally modified engines easily outrunning the pursuers, while the cloaking field they'd installed started messing with the enemy's tracking sensors. Another little surprise for them. "They're launching targeting drones!" Torin's voice crackled from the engine room. "They're built to cut right through stealth fields." "I see them," Kale replied, his focus total as he yanked the ship into a hard, evasive maneuver. The small vessel banked sharply, weaving through the first wave of drones like a dancer. Lyra, who had spent countless hours in a flight simulator for this very moment, slid into the co-pilot's chair, her face a mask of concentration. "We've got to make it to the jump point," she said, her gaze fixed on the navigation display. "Once we punch into hyperspace, they can't track us without our exact coordinates." "I'm on it!" Kale shot back, his knuckles turning white as he wrestled with the controls. "But these drones are all over us, like angry hornets." A series of heavy thuds vibrated through the ship as a few drones managed to lock onto the hull. "They're trackers!" Torin shouted through the comms. "If we jump with those things on us, they can follow us through hell and back." Kale's mind raced for a moment. "Emergency Protocol 7, Lyra, you know the drill?" "You know I do," she replied, her fingers already a blur on her own console. "Localized electromagnetic pulse. It's gonna knock our own sensors offline for a second, but it'll fry those drones for good." The pulse exploded from the ship in a blinding, silent flash of blue light. Just as they'd practiced, the Dawn Spark systems went dead for a heart-stopping moment, plunging them into darkness and silence. But the drones clamped to their hull, sparked and fell away, their circuits totally fried. "Sensors are rebooting now," Lyra announced as the screens flickered back to life. "I've got the jump point coordinates locked. The security ships are still on our tail, but they're losing ground." "Initiating jump sequence," Kale called out. "Everybody hold on, it's about to get rough." The Dawn Spark started to shake violently as the hyperdrive spun up, bending space itself around them. For one terrifying second, it looked like the interceptors would get off a final volley, their laser blasts searing past the ship's shields in streaks of red fire. Then, with one last, massive surge of power, the Dawn Spark vanished into hyperspace, leaving Krianu 9 and all of its dark secrets, an entire dimension behind them. In the weird, silent calm of hyperspace travel, they all finally gathered in the ship's tiny common area. With Lyra assisting, Kale carefully removed the neural suppressors from her parents' minds. The procedure was delicate and tense, but it was a success. As her parents recovered, they told their story. And this was the reveal that changed everything. They described being torn away from Lyra, being told she had died, and being forced to work on terraforming machines that were supposedly healing damaged worlds. But the corporation had twisted their beautiful work into something monstrous, a weapon that could control a planet's population by controlling the very air they breathed. Solara pulled Lyra into a tight embrace, tears of sorrow and joy rolling down her cheeks. "We never, ever gave up hope of finding you," she said, her voice shaking. "Even with the suppressors trying to wipe you away, some part of us held on. It's what kept us going." Lyra hugged her mother tightly, her own voice quiet but firm. "And I never stopped searching for you. Even when they tried to steal my childhood, I held on to your names." Days later, drifting safely in the quiet currents of hyperspace, they were a family again, but they were also fugitives. They had no final destination, but they had a mission that was clearer than any star chart: stay free and expose Varkon Industries for the monsters they were. One evening, as they shared a simple meal, Varun finally broke the silence. "Model So what's next?" he asked, glancing between Lyra and Kale. "We're free, sure. But we're also the most wanted fugitives in this whole sector. Is there anywhere we can even run to?" Kale thought for a second. "We could find some forgotten planet, start fresh with new identities." But Torin, who'd been listening in silence, brought his fist down on the console. "And just let thousands more go through what we did? Ceruleans like you? And who knows how many other species are being used like living tools all across the galaxy?" Lyra's voice cut through the rising anger, calm and focused. "We have proof this time. We have the suppressors. We have the facility's entire database that Torin swiped, and we have our own stories. We can take this to an authority that the corporations can't buy off. The Terran Coalition could be an option," Kale offered, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "A scandal this huge might be exactly what they need to finally challenge corporate dominance out here." "That's a massive gamble," Solara pointed out. "The corporations have eyes and ears everywhere." They debated deep into the night, their anxieties and hopes swirling in the recycled air of the ship. But when the star outside their viewport rose again, their minds were made up. They weren't going to run. They were going to fight back. They would arm themselves with the truth and use it to free every single person still caught in the corporation's greedy grip. First on the list, expose Varkon Industries for the monsters they were and tear them down. Using a heavily scrambled comms channel, they reached out to a trusted contact, Dr. Celine Varn, laying out their entire plan to bring their evidence to the Terran Coalition. A few days crawled by before a reply came back. A top-secret meeting was set up on Solaris Station, a neutral zone orbiting Jupiter. This was their one real chance. The trip itself was a nightmare of close calls, but they managed to slide through corporate checkpoints using forged ID codes and the Dawn Spark's stealth capabilities. And that's when their plan for a discreet little meeting got completely torched. Right before they reached the station, an emergency alert screamed to life on every public channel across the sector. The payback was sweeter than anything they could have imagined. Because the broadcast wasn't from the corporation, it was from them. Torin, being the tech wizard he was, had helped Lyra seize control of the entire network. "Attention! All ships!" Her voice rang out, steady and powerful, bouncing between the stars. "This isn't a legal notice. This is a declaration of truth. My name is Lyra Vera, and for 15 years, Varkon Industries led me to believe my parents were dead. They lied." She aired all of it: the video logs from the facility, the scientific reports on the neural suppressors, and the gut-wrenching testimony from her parents. Varkon's stock value hit absolute zero in less than an hour. The Terran Coalition immediately launched a massive investigation, and the systems under Varkon's thumb exploded into open revolt. They'd done it. The happy ending wasn't just for them, it was freedom for thousands. And the lesson here? It's that a single person, armed with the truth and a little hope, can be stronger than the most powerful corporation in the galaxy. Don't ever let anyone convince you your story is worthless. Can you imagine being treated like nothing more than a piece of equipment? Your own thoughts silenced by a device screwed into your head just because some corporate bylaw decided you weren't technically a person? That was the reality for Ulra and every other Kariwan, classified as living assets under Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C. But a single broadcast was about to flip their entire world upside down. Huddled around the ship's comms panel, the air thick with anticipation, they heard a stiff, official voice announce that the original classification was overturned. All Saruans were now, by law, recognized as sentient beings, with every right that comes with it. But do you really think the fight is over just because a law was passed? Stick around and see what happens when changing the rules is a lot easier than changing people's minds. An astonished silence fell over the group before it erupted into a quiet, hopeful celebration. Laura stared at Kyle, her eyes shining with a hope she'd been too scared to feel for years. Did we actually win? Just like that? Kyle cracked a small smile, but his tone was cautious. I doubt it was that easy. Dr. Vaughn must have made one heck of a case with the data we gave her. Torin, always the pragmatist, added, or the Terran Coalition finally saw its chance to make a move. They've been itching for a reason to cut the corporations down to size in this sector. The broadcast wasn't finished. It issued a direct order for companies to remove all neural suppressors and provide back pay for all service rendered, promising severe consequences for non-compliance. Varen, who had seen his fair share of corporate tricks, was doubtful. They'll stall. They'll find legal loopholes, claim it's too complicated, anything to avoid doing it. But Celera, gathering her family into a tight embrace, saw the opportunity. It's a beginning, she said, her voice filled with relief. It's a legal weapon we can use, Torin pointed out, his eyes sharp. And we still have all the original evidence. If they ignore the law, we'll blast every single violation across the network. Their journey to Celera Station was no longer about finding a place to lay low. It was about making sure that new law had some serious bite. They had to help other Saruans transition from being property to being people, and they had to make sure the ones who got rich from their misery were held accountable. Their ship, the Dawn Spark, was now a vessel of liberation. They hopped from system to system, tracking down facilities where Saruans were still being exploited and personally ensuring their neural suppressors were shut down for good. Sometimes a simple conversation with a clueless manager was all it took. Other times, it meant standing off against corporate security, with Quran's energy shield being the only thing standing between them and a very bad day. And at every stop, they did more than just free them. They empowered them. They taught them how to disable the suppressors on their own, how to collect proof of illegal treatment, and how to apply for the new identities and back wages they were now owed. Word of their actions spread like a current through the sector's hidden networks, and before long, the Dawn Spark was the stuff of legend. Other ships started joining their fleet, freelance haulers, corporate insiders who'd had a crisis of conscience, and even a few Saruans who had escaped years ago and had been living in the shadows. 6 months after that game-changing broadcast, they finally reached Celera Station. Their little mission had blossomed into a full-scale freedom movement. The Terran Coalition officials who met them were blown away by the network they'd built, the mountain of new evidence they'd gathered, and the real-world changes they had already made. "We can offer you protection," the head official stated, reviewing their data with clear respect. "You can have new homes on any Coalition planet, New identities if you wish. We even have positions for you in our xenobiology and engineering divisions." Lara, who had grown from a scared survivor into a calm and capable leader on their journey, exchanged a knowing glance with Kale. "We appreciate that truly," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "But our work isn't finished. There are still so many others trapped in places the Coalition can't even see. The Dawn Spark is still needed out there." The official nodded, his expression one of pure admiration. "We understand. In that case, allow us to provide you with unofficial diplomatic credentials. They should help you get through a lot of closed doors. And naturally, you'll have our unconditional support," the Terran official added. "Technical assistance, supplies, intelligence, anything you require, at any time." Kyle, Elara, and the rest of their crew accepted the offer with deep thanks. They took the chance to give the Dawn Spark a total refit in Silera Station's cutting-edge shipyards. When it emerged, it was a completely different vessel. Its stealth tech was so advanced it was practically invisible. Its medical bay was expanded and upgraded for their rescue work, and the crew quarters were enlarged to accommodate their growing team. On the day they were scheduled to depart, Lara stood on the observation deck, gazing at the breathtaking, swirling chaos of Jupiter. It was a silent, humbling reminder of just how far they had come. Kale joined her, standing by her side in comfortable silence. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice low. "Having any second thoughts?" Lura shook her head, her gaze fixed on the view. "No. Just thinking about where it all began. From a cargo container in some back alley market to, well, this. From being stamped as defective merchandise to..." She gestured to the new pin on her uniform, a Terran Coalition diplomatic seal gleaming right beside the simple silver name tag Kale had crafted for her. "You were never what they said you were," Kale said, his tone gentle but absolute. "The system was defective, not you." A faint smile graced Lura's lips as her fingers brushed against the name tag. "I've been thinking about that other label they gave me. Returned product," she said quietly. "It used to be a source of shame. It meant I was broken, unwanted, passed from one owner to the next. But now," she took a breath, her voice gaining a new kind of power. "I think I'm going to own it, but with a new meaning. Not returned product, but returned power. Because that's what we're doing, isn't it? We're returning power to the people it was stolen from." A look of pure admiration crossed Kale's face. "I love that. The Dawn Spark and the Returned Power mission. Now that's a cause worth fighting for." As they walked back toward the bridge, Lara considered the journey ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. The corporations would always invent new ways to cheat and exploit. They'd always have to stay one step ahead. For the first time she could ever recall, the future wasn't a terrifying unknown. It was an open star chart, and she was the one holding the pen. They would change things one rescue, one liberated voice, one small victory at a time. When the Dawn Spark detached from Silera Station the following morning, its crew was different. They were no longer fugitives on the run. They were pioneers with a purpose that dwarfed them all. Their ship was a beacon against the endless night. As the vessel readied for its jump, Lyra slid into the navigation seat. Her hands moved with a newfound certainty, plotting a path to stars that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. From the pilot's chair, Kale's voice was warm with trust. "So, Captain, what's our first destination?" Lyra punched in the coordinates of a distant system. Their intelligence network had pinged a mining colony that was defying the new regulations, still enslaving its workers with neural suppressors. "Right there," she announced, her voice filled with a quiet, unshakable resolve. "Let's go get them." With a flash, the Dawn Spark vanished into hyperspace, a silver sliver of hope bound for the galaxy's forgotten fringes. And back on Lyra's workstation, a small piece of fabric was waiting. It was a new patch, designed to cover the ugly barcode on her uniform. It didn't represent the scars of her past, but the promise of her future. In simple, bold letters it said, "Returned power."